But if it didn't become a lifestyle change, it wasn't sustainable, or they don't have maybe like a plan after, if it is a sprint, like if they don't have a plan afterwards, they're going to fall right back into how they were because, whoop, they got the payoff. I did it. I look this way. But then it's like, you have to sustain that now. Like you have to continue being the way you were, maybe a little more in a sustainable way for you to maintain that. Because again, is this just like a nice goal that you're just going to achieve and then go back the way you were? Because your life will fall back into the way it was before. Or are you actually serious about making a lifelong change so that a year from now, 2 years now, 3 years from now, 5 years from now, that change is still there?
Let's link up with Krysta on The Fix. She's a wellness coach with a focus on mental well-being and physical strength.
What's happening, Fix listeners? Welcome back to our latest episode of the Fix podcast. I'm your host, Krysta Huber, and today I am joined by a guest who doesn't need too much of an introduction because I've talked about him extensively in my solo episodes over the course of the last 6 months. One of my coaches, a personal development coach that I have worked closely with over the course of 2024 to expand my own skills, to make more time for me, but more importantly, to become more aware and be more in touch with myself. And that is my dear friend and mentor, Oliver. And Oliver and I got connected back in December of 2023 when I was at a point where things were great in business. And I wanted to really start to think about what could allow me to take my experience as a coach to the next level, but actually tap into more of my personal life and really look at what honestly was a disconnect for the way that I was encouraging clients to make time for themselves, to stay committed in the gym, to prioritize meal prep, to be consistent in getting the results that they wanted, but not necessarily practicing what I was preaching, and really digging deep on where that disconnect was coming from, and then thinking about how I could practice this for myself on a daily basis. So in this episode, you'll hear firsthand a lot of the tools that I have implemented in my own life with Oliver. If you haven't listened to some of the solo episodes I did where I've touched on some of the concepts and themes that him and I have worked through together, this will really bring it all together for you. And if you have, it'll just give you even more context. If you are anybody out there who feels like you have dipped your toe in the water a little bit with a self-development journey, or you have not explored something like this before, but realize there could be value for it in your life, I cannot urge you enough to reach out to him, to have the conversation, to talk about what it would look like for you. Because my biggest takeaway from this episode, this conversation specifically, after now having had months and months of conversations one-on-one with Oliver, is what you'll hear me say at the very end. And it's this idea that this work has really actually allowed me to come back to myself and recognize that I have the answers, and the stories I've told myself from the past don't have to dictate the future. And what you'll hear him say is that all we really truly have is the present moment. And with that in mind, as you tune into this podcast, whether you are in your car, commuting to work, or you're sitting on the beach, going for a walk, in the gym, wherever you are listening to this, I challenge you to stay present in the current moment to really take it all in. And with that, let's welcome Oliver to the Fix podcast. Oliver, welcome to the Fix podcast, a long-awaited guest. I've spoken about you in other episodes, not always by name. So I want to say that you're a little bit infamous, but maybe infamous and also mysterious. And we're going to peel back all those layers today. So
Nice.
So happy to have you here to share your message with the Fix audience and really us get to dive into a lot of the work that we've done together and the work that you do with other amazing people. But before we go deep and get into it, I ask all of my guests a little icebreaker question. And I'm a big coffee drinker, as you know. So I want to know what your go to coffee order is.
So I don't usually get coffee. Actually, I get
I didn't
matcha.
think you did. So you can tell
I
me
get
about your
matcha.
matcha. That's cool. Tell me about it.
I just get a matcha latte. If I do get coffee, I honestly get like a ice cold brew with maybe
Nice.
like the nitro vanilla. What is it with the vanilla foam? See, I don't drink coffee too much. So,
Oh,
but
you
when
get
I
the
do,
cold
it's
foam?
either yeah, I usually get the cold foam, maybe a little bit of vanilla. But usually, yeah, usually matcha because matcha has that L-theanine in it, so it helps even out the jitters.
Have you always been a matcha guy or did you get into this like when it got trendy?
No, I knew about it having L-theanine before, and I knew that was actually like it helps counter the jitteriness
Yeah.
of caffeine.
Mhm.
But then I did see someone on Instagram and she was like, "Oh, I get matcha with like a shot of espresso." And I was like, "Let me try that." I did try it. Interesting
Interesting.
taste, but if I wanted a little bit more caffeine with the L-theanine, then I've tried that a couple times. That's actually not too bad. I'll get like almond milk or whole milk, depends. But yeah, usually matcha.
Nice. Well, cool. Well, now that we got the coffee matcha piece out of the way, we're going right for it. And I want to know, yes, we'll explain the type of coaching you do and we'll unpack all of that. We'll go through the resume piece, if you will. But that's a very typical way to introduce a guest on a podcast. And I'm going to ask you to talk about who you are a little bit differently. I want to know who you are at your core. Like if somebody just asked you the question of who is Oliver, and then as a follow up to that, why should we care about what you have to say?
Hmm. That's a good question. Who is Oliver? I feel like I'm still on that still on that path and journey and discovery.
That's a perfect answer. That's
So,
so
but
relevant to
so
what you do.
I want to say student of life. Like if I can boil it down, it's like I'm a student of life. I'm no one's guru. I am in this journey of learning equally as well with everybody else. I'm someone who really does love life. Someone who's persistent. Like there's been multiple times where it's like I should maybe give up or stop. And yeah, I am persistent as well. And I've heard that from people too. Like that comes from people mentioning that. Like, dude, like you're persistent. Like you've you're strong. Like you've been through things some people haven't been through. But yeah, I would just the first thing I said, like student of life, because I never want to seem like I'm higher than other people in certain regards. Um, so yeah, student of life.
I love that. And I love that because something that I've learned from working with you is that, we're in relation to everything and there's something to learn in everything that happens to us and comes up for us. So, as we kind of unpack that idea and like a lot of the principles that you dive into as a coach, I want to backtrack a little bit and just kind of have you talk through for the listener, like how you got into the space that you're in, because it is a unique type of coaching and you've had a journey to get you there. Like you said, you've been through different things in your life. You have had different, versions of your business, let's say, right? And I think it would be cool to provide that context of like, what was the path that got you to where you are right now and the type of work that you do and support other people through on a daily basis in getting everybody to see themselves as students of life, honestly.
Yes, yeah, and that actually comes to the second thing you asked of why should we care what you have to say? And so for me, the biggest piece of why I do what I do and why it might be important to hear what I have to say is that I've been there. Like I didn't grow up being the star athlete, always in shape, perfect A's. Like it always felt like I was the underdog. I was overweight growing up. I was bullied, extremely insecure. At some point, I just like wouldn't say a word. Like I was just so afraid even to raise my hand in class or public speak. And it always felt like, I was trying to catch up. I wanted to be one of the cool kids, and it just never happened. But that was because I was trying to figure out who I was. Um, and I also know what it feels like to feel hopeless, to feel lost, to struggle, to feel like nothing is working. And, you know, my dad passed away when I was 16 from a very rare heart disease called giant cell myocarditis. It is so rare that if you look it up, it's even rarer than like the ultra rare disease statistics. Like there's less than maybe 500 cases or something. So there's not much research on it. And that led to depression, already kind of had social anxiety. So I think the important thing is that I've been there. I was also in like a 4.5 year long relationship early on, high school sweetheart. So I've also experienced heartbreak and the feeling of that loneliness and trying to find your tribe and people and trying to make entrepreneurship work early on, not always feeling like you fit in, like all the things you probably feel or have felt. I've been there. And so I've spent also an enormous amount of time and energy into finding information and books that can help me and improve my own life and also help me dive into helping people deeper because I was a personal trainer at first, but I knew it was more than that. I wanted to help people
Mm.
at the depths that maybe I felt and help them get out of that too and create meaning out of losing my dad and this heartbreak and the suffering that I went through too. I was trying to find meaning of that. So I've been on multiple retreats, just adventures, exploring again, being a student to life, spending, uh, maybe almost six figures at this point, but like well high five figures into like coaching and investments to improve myself, to also work through the things that I needed to work through and heal. And that was always from the place too of like, I want to become a better coach. Like, I want to be able to help people at the highest level I can. So I'm going to continue to invest into myself to work through the things that are blocking me, stopping me, and being able to then bring that to the people I'm working with as well. So that's what I would say because it hasn't come from some like certification. I've gone through, certain education to learn certain modalities, but it's really come from like personal experience, both in the dark and the depths of my own suffering and in doing the work and knowing what that feels like. And it's always kind of just come back to love. And I'm still walking that path of loving myself and evolving more spiritually. So that's what I'd say.
I love it. And let's touch on what you just mentioned about doing the work because that's become such like a buzzword or buzz phrase over the course of the last few years, at least in my opinion. And I want to know from your perspective, what does doing the work look like? And I know it's kind of a broad question, but maybe just give us a few examples. What does that mean to you?
Doing the work is meeting yourself where you are at in the present moment for you to actually feel what it is you're actually feeling
Mm.
instead of resisting it, ignoring it, pushing it down. And so it's feeling those deep feelings that you're trying to avoid. And instead of running away from it, doing the work is sitting with it, loving it, being in it, and not running away from it. And the reason why the work is hard is because that's difficult. I have to experience the pain that maybe I felt when I was younger, or experience that deep feeling of shame or fear or judgment or guilt or grief or anger in the moment so that I can actually process through me. I have to reparent myself as well, reframe my mindset into seeing the world differently and start doing little practices that feel difficult. So the work is really about being present with yourself instead of constantly trying to avoid it. It's actually sitting with all the things you don't want to sit with. So. That's what I would say.
Yeah, and I'm for anybody listening to the audio, not watching the video, I'm smiling so big because I can attest from my personal experience with you and what I've learned about myself in the time that we've worked together is that I did not create the space to feel a lot of the emotions that were coming up for me in lots of different scenarios. And I actually love that it's called the work because it is a long term process. And there's always going to be events and situations and instances that come up that test you with it. As we're recording this, and this will drop pretty quickly, we're going to have this episode come out next week. So I had something literally just happen to me today that I texted you and I was like, "Hey, I got this message." Like, and the first thing you asked me was, what do you feel in your body?" And if you had asked me 6 months ago, like, what do you feel in your body? I'd be like, I don't know. I'm not thinking about that. And now I've come to understand why that matters because it gives me like a totally different lens on the experience. Like before, I would have made it about the other person or like what was actually being said. Whereas I feel what we've been able to do together is to actually bring back to myself. And not there's necessarily a question in that, but I think this episode will be more of a conversation because I just want to add like my take on what does this tangibly look like in somebody's life. And
Yes.
from there, being able to be more connected with yourself has actually allowed me to see why other pursuits that I've had, like let's tie it into nutrition and fitness and weight loss and all of it, have felt hard because it was usually because I was disconnected from myself and even my reasons for doing it too. They were like
Yep.
external or thinking that I should be doing something for a certain reason. And that is very much a theme for all of the women that we work with inside of the Fitness Fix. Just a common conversation that I have with people, even on Instagram, of like, I put everybody else first and everybody else before myself, that like it actually becomes uncomfortable to take the time to take care of yourself because there's like guilt, shame, all these other things associated with why we're not doing that. And so I've really found through the course of this year, and I've talked about this repeatedly in the solo episodes that I've done, just kind of like reflecting on what we've done together in the last 6 months, is the fact that like when you are more connected to you, things actually can feel way easier because you just look at it in a totally different way. And I find that I have way less judgment for certain situations, which has made me way less reactive. Like if I take the situation that we had come up today, I would have immediately wanted to like text back like all these things to the message that I got. And I just messaged you first and you were like, "So what are you thinking?" I'm like, "I don't know right now." And that's okay. Like I'm sure something's going to come up for me, but like I don't need to answer this right this second. That's fine. And I didn't think I would
Yeah.
have been able to tell you that like 6 months ago.
Yeah, and that basically showcases that you've also kind of turned the unconscious into the conscious. And that's kind of part of the work too. It's that there's a lot of these unconscious things we're just not aware of yet. And then when we make them more conscious, then we can start to make decisions and choices and start to see things differently. And yeah, for you, you were able to we were able to kind of have that conversation and realize like, hey, the person that sent that message it wasn't actually for you. It was for them.
Mm-hmm.
And then you kind of get to choose like if you want to respond or not respond. And that's super important because most people just maybe instantly react instead of giving them some space, just a little bit of space, and respond how they want to be. And choosing how you want to be is part of the work too. And you get to choose how you want to be when you start turning the unconscious ways that you've been being, which is just based on your past. It's kind of almost like not who you actually are, because maybe you didn't choose to be that way because you didn't choose to have all those things happen to you. And now through healing and coming back to love and coming back to who you are, you get to choose who you are. And usually who you choose who you are is going to be someone who's probably a bit more peaceful, someone who's takes care of themselves, someone who loves themselves a bit more, someone who's a bit more easygoing with themselves, a bit more compassionate and understanding. And so I always say, whoever you're inspired to be when you start doing this work, is more of your true self because it's less of the conditioning from the past and more of the choosing of the present.
So let's talk about presence. We live
Yeah.
in a world where I think there's, let's say, like a lot of threat to trying to be present, right? Social media, things we can numb out with. I'm sure we can riddle off like so many different examples of things that we do to kind of distract ourselves. So if somebody doesn't even realize that they're distracted, because I have come to this conclusion that I think there's a lot of people out there who are like so out of touch with themselves that they don't even recognize what they may be doing to numb out or whatever you want to call it. How, if somebody's like looking to recognize these things, like where can they start? Like what is something that they can do for themselves to kind of just check in if they're that disconnected? Because I feel like a lot of people are in fact that disconnected.
Yeah. Check in with your breath. Check in with your breath because your breath is part of your autonomic nervous system. You're just going to breathe no matter what. But your breath is also one of the pretty much one of the only parts of your autonomic nervous system where you can kind of control it. And so if you check your breath when you're distracted, it's likely quick, it's likely shallow. And so if you just check in with your breath and take some, as cliche as it is, take some deep
That's
breaths because that's what part of being present is. You bring the breath all the way down into the belly. You expand both the belly and the chest. You feel your chest rising and just long exhale out, just feeling the chest fall. And it starts to just become a little bit more present. Be like, okay, do I want to be continuing to scroll on TikTok or social media or distracting myself in this way? No, I don't. And that can be difficult because we've created neural connections to getting this dopamine from this thing. And so just checking with your breath is going to be a really easy way to just like get present because your breath is right there in the present.
and it's also happening like to go back to what you were saying before about like the subconscious, like we don't think about breathing, we just do it.
Yep. Yep. So giving some attention to something that's already automatic slows you down right away. And breathing a bit slower is going to slow your heart rate down too. So you're going to be less anxious as well. And if we're talking about like brain waves as well, when you're distracted and you're like really distracted, you're kind of like going towards different things.
Mm-hmm.
Your brain is going to be in a beta brainwave state, right? So this is like a high state for your brain waves. And that can be good when you're like trying to do certain work. But when you start slowing down a little bit, your brain waves go into alpha. And so you're a little bit slow, like brainwaves are a bit slower. You're actually in this like kind of calm, focused state. If you've ever like read a great book and you're just kind of like in this flow state, you're reading it, you feel relaxed, maybe even start getting tired, but like you just feel really good. You're going into alpha. That even happens sometimes when you watch like a movie, which is like long enough for your attention to kind of absorb into the story. The same thing happens. But because social media and certain things that are very quick, they um they distract us enough that yeah, your brain's going to be in more of a high beta state instead of an alpha. So it also helps as well. And just relaxing yourself down, getting present because your presence isn't about what you're doing. Your presence is how much of you is in what you're doing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm just absorbing what you just said. I think that was so good. You might want to say it one more time because that's
So your
powerful.
presence, yeah, yeah, your presence isn't about what you're doing. Your presence is about how much of you are in what you're doing. See, you could be doing anything, but if you're not present with it, then the time's going to feel different, right? But when you spend time with, like, let's just give an example. When you spend time with another person
Mhm.
and you're not really present, maybe the time actually goes a bit slow, or it's not as enjoyable, or maybe it's like quick in a different way. But when you're like really present with another person, all of you is in the moment that you're having. The entire experience is different because you're actually allowing yourself to like feel and be in the moment.
Sure.
And that can happen with anything. That's actually why I really like exercise and lifting, because when you're like in the moment, I'm not thinking of
Mhm.
anything besides like the set I'm doing or the actual rep that I'm doing if it's like if it's like pretty heavy, but I can know too when I don't have a great workout when I'm not present with it. I'm putting all my mind, the mind muscle connection too. I love that as well because,
Yeah.
you know, whether it helps you build more muscle or not, that's not the point. You're just like so present with it. Nothing's happening besides me contracting my chest on this like push exercise, right? Or me like thinking about the squat and all the different mechanics of it. Or meal prepping, right? If we go into any of these, like if you're meal prepping and you're distracted, you're actually taking joy out of the experience that could have joy in it just because you're allowing yourself to fully be in the present moment, which is the only moment that exists ever in reality for the rest of our time on this
Right.
planet. There will only ever be the present moment because the past exists in our memory and the future exists in our imagination. And we can get into like the quantum field and all that. But just in general, those things also exist in our mind and thoughts. So being present is, yeah, all how much you are in the moment.
And I think that point about like the present moment is literally all we have. That realization, bringing it back to decisions like meal prep or going to the gym or whatever it is around your health and wellness. When I think about periods where I was like annoyed by doing meal prep, like we've talked about this before, using the word I have to do this or I should do this thing. And I think back to like why it bothered me. It was usually because I was in a rush to do it. And it's like, okay, wait a second. You know that doing this thing in the example of meal prep is going to help you actually manage your time because maybe you are really busy, right? So what's the point of going through the experience and being like, ugh, this is like the last thing I want to be doing right now? It doesn't serve you in any way, but that is for a lot of people like the default of being like, oh, I just got to like go get this thing done and let me just get it done. And I think I'll feel better once I get it done. And I think there's certain things like when it comes to this idea of anxiety, we can create anxieties by pushing things off, right? And like not taking care of something or responsibility that we have or whatever. But when I actually think about what's like created more peace for me, it's just like, how can I do something like meal prep and actually make it more fun? And maybe part of it being fun is being efficient at it and being like, okay, like, let me see if I can do this in 30 minutes, right?
Yeah.
But if you're like, oh, like I don't want to be doing this right now, what is one of the first things you do? Maybe go pick up your phone like while you're meal prepping. And then guess what? It actually makes it take longer because you had that interruption when you could have just been standing in your kitchen, focusing on prepping whatever 3, 4, 5 things that you kind of like set out for yourself. And it's just a lot of, for me, I've realized like that energy of like being like annoyed about doing something that I know is going to help me. I just like I don't know why I was that way before in looking at it now because I'm like that was like energy that wasn't useful for me to put towards something like that. Like I find myself like not getting as like aggravated by things that I used to just find annoying for whatever reason.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I would say that, you thought that your time would be better spent doing something else, even though you also wanted to do it. You're
Right.
like, oh, I could be doing something other than this. It's such an obligation. And when that happens, it's important to reflect, and for anyone listening, where where are we not having appreciation or gratitude for these things? Because once you
Mm-hmm.
put appreciation and gratitude into it, you also become more present. And again, I think I like what you said with, even if it's you kind of make it a game, like, can I get this done in 30 minutes? Being present doesn't mean it having to be slow, it just, again, it means how much of you are in it. So if making it fun is like seeing how quick you can do it, you're probably actually gonna be more present because all you're focused on is just the meal prep. But if all you're focused on is the meal prep, that's still better than trying to meal prep and think like you have to get it done because you have to do this other thing, or these 1,000 other things. It's like you're gonna get there. Like you're gonna get there. So might as well just be with whatever you're doing, even if you have to do it quickly, just be with it, right? Because thinking about what you have to do next doesn't help do the current thing. And bringing gratitude into it. Oh, I get to do this. I actually get to do. I get to meal prep because maybe there was a time where I couldn't. Maybe there was a time where this was more difficult. I get to because I'm choosing that I want to be healthier. I'm choosing what I really am putting in my body instead of unconsciously doing it. And I know that there's a lot of people who maybe don't get this choice, who aren't conscious about it, or who are on food stamps, or, who don't have the resources that I have. So actually, I'm really grateful that I even get to meal prep because a lot of people don't get that luxury. And bringing in gratitude as well helps you become equally as present and less frustrated.
Mm-hmm. What are some ways that you can actively bring in gratitude outside of just like stopping and observing the thought that you're having that's making you frustrated? Like talk us through some of the other what's activities or like exercises, if you will, that you can do to make that more of just like naturally the way that you do think.
I think a really simple one is is actually writing down. So there's a couple ones that come to mind. One, it's all about just getting your mind to start thinking of the things that you can be grateful for. So doing like writing 3 to 5 things that you're grateful for every morning, and even challenging yourself. Do like a 10-day challenge. And so every morning write some like 3 to 5 things that are different.
Mm-hmm.
And so how that's expanding your mind because you can't do the same things every day. And so you have to start going to like all the maybe tiniest things, the things you don't even think about that you can be grateful for. And so that's one that can just be a daily morning or night habit to kind of expand your mind and perspective around all the things you can be grateful for. Another is kind of a in the moment present thing you can do is just kind of look around your surroundings, look down at your hands, just look at everything around you and just spend the next 5 minutes just looking at everything that you can be grateful for. I mean, I even just looked down at my hands. I'm like, I'm grateful for my thumb and every single one of my fingers. I can be grateful for every single one of my fingers.
Sure.
Grateful that I have a hand that is functional because I really am, because if I didn't have a hand, it'd be kind of difficult to do certain things, like
A
to
lot
just,
of things. Yeah.
yeah, to live my life in the way that's enjoyable. And so I can be grateful for my hands, grateful for my arms, grateful for the strength I have, grateful for this mic, grateful for this desk, this water bottle, my little ergonomic mouse that, an old client gave me, grateful for this book I have, for the laptop I'm using, grateful for the internet access to have this call for Zoom to be a thing. Nowadays for the light I have. I'm grateful for the window and for me to be able to look outside. I'm grateful for the sun and the butterflies that I'm seeing out there and the birds and the grass and all the trees. So you can spend 5 minutes just looking at like what's everything I can look at and just be grateful for because yeah, without some of these very little things, your life would be different actually. So those are two exercises to just get yourself in that mode of like where you can put your gratitude and how to just expand your thinking around the things you can be grateful for.
As somebody who's done both of them with you, I can attest that they are really helpful. And they're easy to execute on. That's the other thing. I think like a lot of people think about, let's go back to the same verbiage we were using before, like the work as this like very daunting mountain, like all these layers that have to be uncovered, or this like this really elaborate practice that should be in place every single day. And something that I feel like you've really dispelled for me is the fact that, like, hey, let's actually look at these different tools and pick the ones that you feel like can really fit into your life. And it doesn't even necessarily have to be every day, but when you find and are aware and notice things that are coming up for you because you're more present, can you use them at that time to help you work through whatever it is that may be kind of going on? I think I had a lot of like, and I've never asked you if other people that you've worked with have felt this way prior to working with you, but I always had this perception that in order to get to this place of feeling more peaceful, feeling more present, feeling more connected, and like aware of who I am, it would require this like routine that had to be so rigid, and I couldn't deviate from it. And if I did, then I would immediately go back to the feelings that I didn't like that I had before. I felt like I didn't have control over before. And that's so not true.
Yeah, wow, that was actually really important for you to say because I think maybe a lot of the personal development industry maybe like preaches things like that. Like you
Yeah.
have to do this kind of morning routine or like
Right.
these things like every day. And I think what you said there of if I don't do these things and I'll feel those feelings that I don't like. And it's right there that we've already set a trap. It's if you
Right.
have to do these things so that you can be complete because you don't want to feel the things you don't want to feel, then you've already lost the way because it's the full acceptance and love of those exact feelings that you don't want to feel that is a part of the work. And that isn't a set amount of routines. It's certain practices that you can bring into the moment when you are experiencing those. There are certain things you can do on a daily basis to increase your awareness and your what we call witness consciousness, which is your ability to witness your thoughts and your emotions, right? So that can be journaling, to be able to kind of understand your thoughts more and put things down on paper so they're not stuck in your head. And to also ask yourself questions and answer questions. It could also be meditations so that you can practice sitting in stillness and practice relaxing your breath and relaxing your mind. It can also be meditation where you're just witnessing yourself and you're able to kind of objectify what things that feel super subjective, which is your thoughts and your feelings. You're like, oh, I'm not my thoughts and my feelings. They're just existing within me. I don't have to, and then I attach myself to them. Okay, I don't have to attach myself to them. And I really give this beautiful analogy that we've talked about in the beginning of that, like your thoughts and feelings and the actions you take too, it's like a garden, and you're a gardener. And so wherever you put your attention, to in that garden, if you're watering weeds and you're wondering why all the weeds are growing, right? The negative thoughts, the negative feelings, and instead of the flowers or tomato plants that you want and the vegetables you want, whatever it is, then you can't get upset at yourself because you're continuing to water all the weeds when you can really put your attention to what it is that you want.
Mm-hmm.
And funny enough, when you start putting attention to what it is you want, it starts to appreciate, starts to grow, right? You start to plant the seed, right? And the seed takes a little bit of time to grow, but the more you water it, the more attention you give to it, right? With your presence, right? Because what is presence and attention? It's love. When I give my presence and attention to another person, to any living being with care, any living thing, right? Especially a plant, what happens? It
It
grows.
grows.
Yeah. What happens when you stop giving it attention?
Dies.
Dies. Or what happens when you judge it and condemn it and shame it? Basically just cutting it. It's like, you're
Right.
so ugly. And we do that to ourselves, right?
Mm-hmm. I love that analogy. I think it's great. And we talked about this when you joined one of our group coaching calls inside of the Fitness Fix of like really actually auditing and paying attention to the way you're speaking to yourself and asking yourself, would you talk to your friend that way? Would you talk to your daughter that way? Would you talk to somebody that you really love that way? And that kind of got us down this path of understanding what self-love looks like and how to like give that love to yourself. And of course, everything you're saying about the gratitude practices and even the breath are all representative of ways that you can love yourself. Same with meal prep, same with going to the gym. But I find that many people don't necessarily have that talk track or like that connection to, oh, going to the gym is a way of me showing myself love. And I feel that a lot of that just comes from, like diet culture, as well as this idea that you're going to go to the gym, diet, make any of these decisions from a place of like punishing yourself into change versus caring for yourself and like taking it from a place of actually loving yourself. So, what would you say to that person who has this story that, oh, well, like, for example, the one that I get a lot with clients when they first start working with us is like the whole every workout I do has to leave me like so exhausted on the floor in order for it to count towards me achieving my goals. And that's coming from a way they were previously trained, but it's coming from this idea that then it's not enough if they do anything less than that. And how would you encourage somebody to maybe change that narrative or just actually like recognize it for what it is? Because I found in working with you, I didn't know until we talked through things and be like, well, why do you feel that way? Why do you feel that way? What's underneath that? That those are actually representatives of these ideas of like, I feel like I'm not enough.
Yeah. Yeah, that's actually that's important. That's an important question to ask because I would I'd ask, what's the actual goal?
Mm-hmm.
Because if the goal is requiring something that's unsustainable, then is it really a goal worth going after? And you can have sprints. I'm not saying you can't have things that you sprint towards. But if someone is looking for sustainable results over a long period of time, I want to drop some weight. I want to look a certain way and I want to feel really good and I want that to last. Great. Then is it about every workout being you dying for it to feel good enough, or is it about the consistency of you getting in a certain amount of times a week and just worrying about like progressing every workout or every other workout and over a long period of time, like you're progressing, you're getting stronger in the exercises that you're doing, right? It doesn't mean you have to kill yourself every time, right? And so I would say change the goal, right? Because you're trying to do this as a lifestyle change. You're trying to change your identity to be someone who goes to the gym, someone who eats healthy, someone who feels good in their body, someone who's strong, right? That doesn't mean you have to go in and kill yourself every time. That just means maybe you have to just get in and, you know, lift maybe a little bit heavier or the exact same you did last time, right?
Mm-hmm.
It just means, showing up. Showing up doesn't mean being lazy with it, but that's what I would ask. It's like, what's the actual goal here? Do you want to go
Right.
back to where you were a year from now?
Yeah.
No, I'm
Because we
assuming
wouldn't
no.
be having this conversation if what you tried in the past, that story from the past, was truly really like working for you, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think a lot of people think that once they get to that destination, once they look that way, then they'll feel better about themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is, they'll build a lot of respect for themselves for doing that. But if it didn't become a lifestyle change, it wasn't sustainable, or they don't have maybe like a plan after, if it is a sprint, like if they don't have a plan afterwards, they're going to fall right back into how they were because whoop, they got the payoff. I did it. I look this way, but then it's like you have to sustain that now. Like you have to continue being the way you were, maybe a little bit more in a sustainable way for you to maintain that. Because again, is this just like a nice goal that you're just going to achieve and then go back the way you were because your life will fall back into the way it was before. Or are you actually serious about making a lifelong change so that a year from now, 2 years now, 3 years from now, 5 years from now, that change is still there, right? Because that's what's important.
100%. And it's more important to acknowledge the goal of wanting the change to still be there over how fast you're going to make it happen. And I find that that's usually what's competing for people, is because they want something to happen faster. But something I've also kind of noticed recently with clients that I've been doing too is saying, you're telling me you're frustrated, like when their check-in process comes up, and they're saying they had expectations for like achieving a certain goal by, let's say, the end of June, and being more upfront with them of just saying this from a place of like, okay, like we have two options here. There's tons of options, but let's just say there's two, just to make it really straightforward, right? You're saying that you want this certain thing accomplished by the end of June. Here is objectively what it may take for you to change in terms of your behavior. And it's like, are you willing to give that up just to get to this certain goal by June? And if you're not, then let's just work on the frustration piece, because that's really what's keeping you stuck. Like, you say you want this thing, but I can help you make that happen. That comes with the responsibility of, going out to eat way less, maybe giving up alcohol, and being like, what I've been kind of like changing around this for myself is actually, as a coach, just being more upfront about that, and in a loving way saying, hey, that's cool, and I'm more than happy to support you to do that, but if you want my knowledge of like what's going to guarantee for that to happen, this needs to change. Are you willing to do that for the next couple of weeks? I can support you if you
Yeah.
want, but 9 times out of 10, it's maybe not what you want, because if it was, you wouldn't have engaged in those behaviors in the first place, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And this actually, funny enough, this like circles right back to the work and healing. It's about being able to let go of things like the work and healing and kind of, let's say, like getting the results that we want in our life. It's sometimes not about adding more, but letting go of more. It's getting rid of more. It's like simplifying it. And that's why I think that was good, because that actually circled it back right back around to that's exactly what the work is, because we have to let go of old stories for new stories to exist. And that also comes to that. Like, you have to let go of the old story of how your life was, and maybe some of these habits that like you've found so much pleasure in. It's like, are you willing to let go of these short-term pleasures and these short-term kind of gratification for this long-term vision that you have? Because the feeling of achieving that, I think achieving is important. The long-term vision of what it is you do want is going to feel so much better, because it's you respecting yourself. It's you becoming someone of your word, saying, I want this, and actually doing it, and building that discipline and mental fortitude will translate into so many different areas. And it's not that short-term pleasures are bad.
Right.
It's just it's knowing who you are enough where you're like, I know what it is I want. And then you have to be willing to accept that I don't want that. I'm not willing to make those changes. So how do I do it? Maybe in a bit more of a slower way that fits in with what I do want, right? Or someone that says, well, I do want it, but I don't know if I want to give this up. And then that's where you have to make the decision. You have to ask yourself, who do you want to be? Or do you want to be the person that can kind of stop all those things for the next couple weeks? Like discipline themselves, and like, I don't even like the word discipline, but like just like commit to it enough
Sure.
where you're like, yeah, I can let go of those things for this period of time, right? Or maybe you're not. So that's why part of the work too is you having that connection with yourself where you can really make those decisions and like stick with them and like really commit to them, because that takes knowing yourself.
So, based on that perspective, would you make the argument from your experience with coaching and just conversations you have generally, do you think that people don't actually know what they really want? Like, for as much as someone would be like, I want to lose 15 pounds, like, and they think they know what they want, me kind of reading between the lines of what you just said, I'm questioning if the reality is that most people don't actually know what they want.
I think most people do, but they don't. So it's like, I think deeper down, they're aware of what they really, really want, but they will come forth with the like surface level want.
Mm-hmm.
And it might just take a little bit of digging to find what it is that they actually want. And most of what we all actually want is usually the feeling behind whatever that thing is that we're saying we want. But I would say usually no, because it's really our entire past and the conditioning that we have gone through and the absolute propaganda of marketing companies and ads and social media and everybody else's life and desires has kind of bled into our subconscious into what we think that we want or what we think we need to have for us to feel happy, to feel loved, to accept ourselves, and finally give ourselves permission to give ourselves that love, to feel good about our lives. And so I think there's a lot of external opinions that we kind of have to sort through to get to what we actually want. It's like maybe it's not the 15 pounds. Maybe what you actually want is to like finally feel like confident in your body and that you can accept and love yourself. Like that you actually feel like you've for once respect yourself enough to, follow through with something that you just want to feel good in your body. And that has nothing to do with the 15 pounds, but it's important because now you're, oh, that's what I actually want. And you can start giving yourself that as you're moving towards losing the 15 pounds. Like you can have both. And then now the process of you moving towards the 15 pounds is like the 15 pounds is a byproduct of you kind of making a choice and loving yourself for making that choice and staying committed to that choice. It's not like once I get to 15 pounds, then like I'll have it. It's like you're actually becoming more confident and loving yourself throughout the whole process.
Yeah. And I've found, as a coach who's always really believed in the power of habits, I've found that there's like this staying power of those habits when you can tie it to exactly what you just said about like appreciating how you feel in getting there. And I think it's better worded that way than the whole like cliche of like, oh, like trust the process, right? Because I think that frustrates people too. And and people, meaning myself, like I don't like to give that advice as a coach because it's like, okay, well, that's kind of vague. Like, why should
Yeah.
I trust this? Like, just because you're saying it, sure. Like, obviously, if you've created that type of trust with the client, great. Like, that's the bare minimum, but that's not enough to actually get you to a place of like fully committing to the change. And I think the connection to the feeling aspect has just personally for me in the last year been such a game changer in being more committed to the habits because I already knew all of those habits were serving me. I literally spend my days telling other people to do them. And I had a lot of judgment for myself of like, why do I tell other people to do this and then I'm not executing on it myself? And the more I tap back into like, well, how does it make me feel when I go to the gym? How does it make me feel when I choose to meal prep? How does it make me feel when I give myself cutoff times for being not on my computer at the end of the day? And yeah, initially, maybe there's some discomfort, but it's like, what's on the other side of that? You won't know unless you actually practice it.
hmm And you practice it long enough to experience the kind of cascading effects that it can have, right? It's like meditation is a really good example because I feel like a lot of people might feel like they can't meditate. And it's
Oh, I used
just
to think that too. I was like so convinced that there's no way I can meditate. And you had me within what, maybe a month of us working together, you asked me to just practice being still for an hour. And I was like, there's no way I can do it. And I did it.
yeah, and the thing with meditation experiences like that is you just don't know until you do it and you start doing it just a bit more. Like, all right, let me test this out. And I think that's why like being a student to life is also it's about curiosity. It's like
Mhm.
constantly staying curious And if you stay curious, you're like, you know, let me try this. Like, let me do this for 30 days and see what happens. But like, let me really do it. Like, let me kind of experiment with this. Maybe a student to it. And from those experiences, you'll start to notice more of, wow, oh, actually, I feel really good doing this. And do I value that? Do I value the feeling that I'm getting from this? I do. So I want to continue to be that way because, we will really continue to do things that fall in alignment with the way we view ourselves. So how we or what we believe most will kind of dictate how we actually act in the world and vice versa, right? It's like the actions reinforce the belief too. So if someone believes that they're not good enough or not worthy enough to like feel good in their body or that they can never be disciplined or they can't work out, they don't know how or they're afraid to or they just love sweets and snacks so much because that healthy food just always tastes bad, like whatever those beliefs are, they're going to
Mhm.
continue to take action in the way to fulfill those beliefs constantly. That's how like our identity works. And once you start shifting that, well, you start shifting out more and more and more, start taking action in the ways that reinforce the new beliefs. I'm a healthy person. I'm a strong person. I'm disciplined. I respect myself. And I'm a person of my word. So when I say I'm going to do something, like I'm going to do it. I'm also a loving and kind person. So I'm loving and kind towards myself. And then we start taking actions that reinforce that. And then suddenly, over time, our life is different. And we wonder why.
We've talked a lot about the solutions and tools and just the self-awareness that somebody could have to start exploring these things, but I want to make sure that we also talk about who is it that typically works with you and how people usually find you, right? Like what are I don't you could take this however you want, whether it's like, hey, like I typically work with a certain type of person who happens to have a certain career path, like entrepreneurs or other coaches, or you work with somebody who is experiencing these challenges. Like, what do you find are like the main themes of somebody who's coming to look for support from the type of work that you do?
Yeah. Yeah, it's usually someone who is an entrepreneur coach, but also maybe in a bit of a higher stress career as well. It's someone who has maybe done a little bit of the work already. They've been exposed to some personal development, and maybe they've worked with a coach already in some capacity, so they understand the importance of it. Or maybe they've gone to therapy, so they understand the benefit that that had. And they really desire to bring out more of their potentials. This is usually someone who can see that, like, I know there's something missing. I know there's more of me that I want to tap into. And they're likely aware, right? They usually are someone who already has self-awareness that there's certain things that they want to work on,
Mhm.
right? They're not completely like delusional, but like, nope, I know that there's certain things I want to work on. And they want to work on it because they want to be more loving, they want to be more kind, they want to be more at peace with themselves. They want to be a bit more calm. They want to be a bit more present. They want to bring into reality more of their desires, right? They want to be able to actually manifest and take action on the things that they want to take action on. But they also want to know more about themselves. They want to dive deeper into themselves and whether they are someone who struggles with action and they want to get themselves into that position to take more action on their goals, or there's someone who is really great at taking action, but they have a hard time slowing down and creating more peace and flow and presence in their life. Both people need to expand out of fear and into love. And for the people that want that, care about that, and know that's important for themselves and for all the people in their life, that they want to show up better for as well, that's usually the person that I work with that does this kind of work, because I always say that the work that I do with people is for everybody. Like everybody would benefit from it,
Sure.
but everybody's not for it,
Right.
right? Because this is a very intimate, deep space where likely going to be telling me things you've never told anyone, or going into certain places that you've never gone into, um, or it's confrontational. Like
Yeah.
we're
And
confronting very uncomfortable parts of
right.
you, and you're ready for it. You're down for it, because that's where the growth happens. And that, yeah, there isn't a strict structure, because how could there be? The program is you. Like, you're the structure. So whomever you are, it's very individualized in that I'm working with you in this space.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that from my own personal experience. You touched on the fact that people who get connected with you may have done some other type of self-development, and gave the example of like therapy. And that was certainly my experience, but this was just different in a way that you said so well just now, in like confronting things and like confronting parts of you that I've actually learned in comparison to, and this is just my own experience with therapy, right? Like it depends on the therapist, it depends on the type of therapy. But what I've been able to see through the activities that we've done together and the conversations that we have, it always comes back to me. So, like what you just said about the program actually is you. The conversations that you and I have aren't always just about like rehashing situations that happened. It's like, hey, like, how do you feel right now? And then close your eyes and tell me what's coming up for you. And my past experience of working in those types of settings was just more of like, let's talk about the situation and like let me give you my perspective, me being the therapist, of how you might think about this differently. And it was certainly helpful, because it's like you get this third party, they don't have the skin in the game, so to speak. And that was always my
Yeah.
perspective on why I thought therapy was valuable. But the biggest shift that I've had in comparing this type of work, that I would, if somebody asked me like, well, what is it like, or what have you gotten out of it? I've gotten more connected to myself, because perfect example, we've had multiple conversations where you'll ask me like, okay, what do you think about this? Or how do you feel? And if I say, I don't know, you'll be like, yes, you do. You do know. And you're right. I do know. It's just actually taking the time to like sit there and be like, okay, what is actually going on in your head? How are you feeling? And let's talk about that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's different. And there's also always action points. And there's always like, it's always whatever's present for the person in that moment, in that session, then that's what we're going to work through. Sometimes I just take action with the client. It's like they have something coming up and they want to work through it. I'm like, great, let's talk about it, let's hash through it, let's like brainstorm, and let's work within that. And I'll also bring them into asking questions that they might not have thought of asking themselves, to bring out different answers, right? And so part of it too is there's an expansion of someone's view of themselves or the world, because again, maybe they just never had someone that asked these certain questions before. And so
Right.
that's where like we all have blind spots. We all can't see what we can't see. We all don't know what we don't know. And then when we're exposed to it in a certain environment that is very loving and unconditionally accepting, and there's no judgment, you feel very safe to explore all the different parts of you and come back to love, and come back to, what do you want? What do you want? How do you want to be? How do you want to show up? Right? And what do we need to work through for you to come to that question? Right? I'm feeling anxious, feeling, frustrated about this, working through that, coming back to love. I feel really good now. Great. Now what do you want? What do you want to create? And so it's all, it's this beautiful process of coming back to that actual place of creation you want to be in, which is not creating from anger and frustration or anxiety or shame or guilt, but creating from love. That's what this is about.
Amen. So, as we bring this to a close, because we could talk all day, but I want to be respectful of your time. And I appreciate you for sharing all of your insight and perspective. We're going to do a little rapid fire to bring it home, some fun questions, and then we'll end on
Nice.
a little bit more of a serious note. You ready?
Nice, nice. Yes.
Okay. If you could only do one exercise, like one movement pattern for the rest of your life, what are we picking?
Oh man. Um, that's a crazy question.
The hardest question of the episode.
That's that's not how my mind works. My mind can't pick one thing for anything. I'm gonna say pull-ups. I'm gonna say pull-ups.
I've
Pull-ups.
never, you know what? That might be
Say pull-ups.
almost 160 episodes in. That may be a first. That's pretty cool.
Because if you're falling off a cliff, like you want to be able to pull yourself up. So,
Practical. I like it. What's your all time favorite food? I don't think I know the answer to this.
see, these questions don't work. I love food,
It
all
has to be
food.
rapid fire. Like, what's the first thing?
Ravioli. I loved ravioli as a kid. Good ravioli. I'll eat it all day, every day.
Okay, cool. Last podcast you listened to?
Um, I think it was probably some episode of like School of Greatness. I forget what the episode was, but
Lewis
probably
House.
that. Yeah, I don't listen to podcasts too much actually. Funny enough, I'm on a podcast.
It's okay.
Um, but yeah, I think it was that.
Last book you read or currently reading? Because I know you like to read.
A Return to Love by Marion Wilson. I forget her last name, but it's called A Return to Love.
You like it?
I love it. It's an amazing book. I recommend it to you.
Nice. I figured you were going to tell me that. Let's see. Now I don't want to ask you like the favorites because you clearly don't like those. I'm going to go least favorite. If you could avoid one exercise for the rest of your life, you're not doing it. What is it?
Probably burpees. 'Cause burpees
Yeah,
suck.
we don't need them. We don't need them. That's fine. We can still do, we can break that down. We can do push ups. They're not
Yeah.
necessary. Now, this is the more serious note to bring it all home. We obviously covered a lot of ground today. We talked about love. We've talked about self awareness. We've talked about being present. We've talked about gratitude. But if somebody could only take away one thing, one teaching, one realization from listening to this episode all the way through, what would you want to leave them with?
Love is the answer. Love is always the answer, always will be the answer. All of healing is us letting go of all the things that are in the way of our own love, loving ourselves, loving others, seeing the love in other people, seeing love in the world. And if you can just take that perspective and realize that, am, am I being loving right now? Am I being loving towards myself right now? Then you can slow down those points and just ask yourself, where do I need to give my love to today? What part of me needs my love right now? That's that's I would say almost all of what we want with what we do is to feel that love and acceptance maybe we didn't feel when we were younger. So love is the answer.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for sharing your perspective and learnings and teachings with the world. And I'm very excited for the feedback on this episode. But before we let you go, if anybody wants to stay connected with you, follow you on social media, or potentially work with you, where can they find you? We'll put it all down in the show notes.
Yes, yeah, you can find me on Instagram as well as on YouTube. I'll be posting a lot more on there too, and I actually have like some longer testimonial videos on YouTube. It's at Elevate with Oliver. Elevate with Oliver.
Perfect. Cool.
Awesome.
Well, for everybody who tuned in today, we appreciate you guys. And as always, from wherever you're listening from, we hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. We'll catch you next week. Thanks, Oliver.
Thank you. Peace, peace.